The World Beyond the Headlines lecture series is a collaborative project of the University of Chicago Center for International Studies and the International House Global Voices program. Our nationally recognized programming is made possible with support from listeners like you. Secure the future of World Beyond the Headlines programming by making your gift online at alumniservices.uchicago.edu/giving. Please specify World Beyond the Headlines as the area of giving. The World Beyond the Headlines lecture series is supported by the McCormick Foundation, the Norman Wade Harris Fund, and generous contributions from listeners like you.
Tonight, we're fortunate to have journalist Steve LeVine back at the University of Chicago. Steve joined us here last year when his first book, The Oil and the Glory, The Pursuit of Empire and Fortune on the Caspian Sea, came out. This was a history of the former Soviet Union through the lens of oil. Steve covers foreign affairs for BusinessWeek now and was previously a correspondent based in Central Asia and the Caucasus for 11 years with the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times. He has a new book, as I said, Putin's Labyrinth, Spies, Murder, and the Dark Heart of the New Russia. After the talk, Steve will take your questions, so please come up with some good ones, and then you can have a chance to check out his book, get them signed. And we've asked Steve here tonight to take off from his new book and discuss the recent military conflict between Russia and Georgia in a talk that we've entitled Putin's Labyrinth, What Russia Won in Georgia, What the U.S. Will Continue to Lose, Why the U.S. Will Continue to Lose. Please join me in welcoming Steve LeVine.
Thanks, Jeremy. Thanks for having me back. I had a good time here last time. We talked about oil, and usually I've been talking about murder on this tour, but Jeremy said I can only talk about Georgia this time, so I'll try to stick to that. But even after the Georgia events, being these 5 days in August, when Georgia, the Georgian government sent troops into South Ossetia, and the Russians responded by sending troops across the border and then into Georgia proper, and bombing and taking a lot of territory and all that. I had put together a talk that I had been delivering that this is making interference. Is it up too loud? I think it may be. It's the reverberate. Yeah, that's better. Yeah, thanks. Can everyone still hear me? Yeah. Okay. Russell, that's okay. All right. Okay. So the title of this talk, what Russia won in Georgia and why the U.S. will continue to lose. This was the title. This was what I had been delivering for about a month, for all of August and into September, because that's the way it looked. But then the international financial collapse happened, this meltdown, and I'm looking at it completely differently. So scrap that title, and we're talking about the same turf, but I just have a different outlook on it. And the takeaway, just gets straight to the meat of the matter, and then give you the background. We'll circle around and come back to it so you can see why I reached this conclusion, and that's that the turmoil, the global turmoil, Russia's turmoil specifically, and the collapse of oil prices have, of course, created chaos in a lot of places, but they've also created a potential opening, a strategic opening for the next president of the United States, whoever that is. I had been saying until this turmoil that the U.S. had lost Central Asia, that the U.S. had lost the Caucasus, that the U.S. had focused myopically and obsessively on Iraq and forgotten that we had spent 15 years methodically carefully assembling a strategy to plant the United States, to plant the West in Russia's backyard, in the Caucasus and Central Asia, to give these 8 republics. I wish I had a map, and I'm going to guess, I'm going to hope that everybody here is visual, and I'll try to describe it that way. But that strip of land below Russia, just south of Russia, this 15 years that we spent trying to provide these 8 states economic independence from Russia, and then by extension, political breathing room. We forgot that. We forgot that we had done that, and were focused completely on Iraq. And then over the last 6-8 months, Russians have this thing about Georgia. When I was researching the second book, the second book is the story of Russia through murder, through the murders of 6 people, profiles of 6 people. But just as an experiment, while I was going to Moscow, looking at the lives of these people, I asked every Russian I met, "What's your problem with Georgia? Why are you always picking on the Georgians?" The Russians have stopped. Russians love Borjomi water, for example. They stopped importing Borjomi water. There's a knockoff. I forget what they name it. What do they name it, Russell? It's some other name. Arrowhead or something, kicking Georgians out of Moscow and basically assailing Georgians. But no one could ever explain to me what was the thing. Why do you see red when you hear Georgia or Georgians? And anyway, Putin especially does. And Putin hates Mikhail Saakashvili, really detests him. And so there was this very dangerous dance over the last few months that both sides really wanted to fight. And, there were a lot of predictions that they were going to fight, that a war was going to break out, and one did. What I wanted to come out from that is to say that after Russia did enter Georgia and show that this strip of land that you thought was yours was this pro-Western strip of land that you've been fooling around in for 15 years. Well, it's not yours; it's ours. We're willing to go to war for this land. What are you willing to do? So my conclusion from that was, when the West didn't do anything, that it was that Russia, in fact, had taken back its influence there, and the jury was out as to what that meant in terms of Central Asia's independence, the ability from an economic level, the ability of the oil companies to operate. But that was a very long-winded way of saying that I think the game has changed. The game has changed. And Russia, what we're seeing the last few weeks, what we've seen yesterday, the Russians released a guy named Sergei Stupchak, I think his name was, Storchak. Does anyone know this fellow's name? The former deputy economic minister? Say it again? Starchak. He was in jail for a year. The Russians didn't have to release him. A month ago, the Gazprom had been negotiating for 3 years with E.ON, this German power company, for an entry contract into a huge Russian natural gas field called Yuzhne Russkoye Ruskoye, and couldn't get the rights to this field. Why? Because in exchange, Gazprom wanted assets, wanted natural gas assets, particularly pipelines and pump stations in Germany in exchange for this. Suddenly dropped the demand, climbed down. Russia dropped the demand. The withdrawal, the Russian withdrawal from Georgia proper into South Ossetia, into Abkhazia, these are all signs, in my opinion, that Russia is trying to reduce the fronts on which it's fighting. Why is it doing that? Because it's under huge pressure. It's under huge pressure financially, economically. The drop in oil prices and the international banking crisis have really affected Russia, and I see that as an opening for what had seemed like a total losing game for the West, to come in and figure out what its strategic aims are, and go after them. I think that influence has shifted, not power, but influence has shifted to the Dmitry Medvedev, the president, versus Vladimir Putin, the prime minister. This softer, more diplomatic approach to foreign affairs, to economics, because of events, and this is something that can be exploited. One more point, and then I'm going to get into the backdrop, and that's that one of the things that had really irritated Russia up until this moment has been NATO expansion. NATO expansion all the way through Central Europe, Eastern Europe, and then now the talk of Ukraine and Georgia. These are not negotiable, I don't think. I don't think these are ever going to happen. Ever. Not soon, or even not near term, not medium term. Maybe 30, 40 years, something this could happen. I think that NATO expansion was a good, a positive development for the Eastern European nations and the Baltics, but the Georgia and Ukraine are just a bridge too far. It's too much. It won't be accepted, and there are many other areas in which we need cooperation with Russia that don't include that. I don't regard Vladimir Putin as a sinister character. I don't vilify Putin. And in fact, in the second book, I paint an admiring portrait of him, and I'll tell you why. But before I do, just one line. What's the takeaway about Putin? Putin is seeking Russia's strategic interests. The tactics that are used and so forth. This is in the course of pursuing and achieving what he sees as Russia's strategic interests, which is exactly what he should be doing. And it's the West, it's the United States that has been flat-footed and not understood what its interests were, and fought effectively for them. Putin is why do I admire Putin? Putin is disciplined. He is disciplined intellectually, a disciplined thinker. He is disciplined physically. which plays well at home, versus Yeltsin. He is visionary. He is a strategic thinker, like a chess player. He's determined and resourceful and effective. And so so you've watched over the last 8 years that even before, when Putin took power, oil was $20 a barrel. 1999, the end of 1999. So one can't say that he put together his regime, his framework, his policies based on oil. He put all of that together, lowering income taxes to 13%, the tightening up of the budget, the reduction of crime on the streets, the ejection of criminal/oligarchic elements from primary roles in industry. Controversial because he went on to install his own guys, but I don't think anyone would defend Boris Berezovsky as a Democrat, apart from himself. He did all that before oil took off, and then oil took off, and Russia profited from this. He set up the regime that would have done well in a low oil price environment, and then profited when oil then took off through the stratosphere. And Russians still, even with this turmoil, live better today than they ever have. More Russians live better, and as a group, Russians live better at a higher standard of living than they have in their entire history, the Tsarist history, the Soviet history, the post-Soviet history. And they notice that. Russians notice that. And they're happy about that. What do people want around the world? We're an international house here. There are people from around the world and who have traveled around the world. What do people want around the world? They want to be able to send their children to school. They want to be able to live normally, and that there not be basically a normal court system. That's about it. And then then stuff gets piled on. But these are the basics. And suddenly Russians had this, and then on top of that, money to travel around the world. This is a big thing for Russians. And moreover, Putin gave Russians, after a decade of being on their backs, of the humiliation of the 90s, reason to be proud of themselves. It plays well at home when Putin goes into Germany and stands toe to toe with the United States, and says, I don't think that there should be one power dictating to everyone else what they ought to do. We call that belligerent. Is that belligerent? It sounds like it's the truth to me. And to them, he's standing up for Russia. So in a nutshell, he, to borrow Ronald Reagan's slogan from his political campaign, "Morning in America," Putin basically declared morning in Russia. And it played well and plays well in Russia. Parenthetically, just to make one point clear, I don't give Putin a clean slate. Obviously, I draw the line at murder. That's the point of this book, of Putin's Labyrinth. That Putin and Russia regard themselves as rightful members of the G8 nations, and I use G8 as the test group. But Russia is the only member of the G8 that regards murder as an accepted practice of politics and business. It's the only member of G8 in which if you cross an invisible line in business or journalism or politics, you can be murdered with impunity. And even if Putin himself doesn't specifically want that murder to take place, the system is so big, this atmosphere he's created of impunity, that he won't stop it, and he'll protect. The killers, the masterminds, are never found. So just as an example, within these parentheses, Paul Klebnikov. Paul Klebnikov was the Forbes bureau chief in Moscow, murdered in 2004, walking out of his office and shot in the back four times in Moscow. Great fan of Putin's, an admirer of Putin's in print and in public. He crossed some line. We don't know what line he crossed. Putin publicly stated, an American partner of ours has told me that Paul Klebnikov died for democracy in Russia. I agree with that. And when Putin was next in the United States for the UN General Assembly in fall 2004, he visited with Paul Klebnikov's widow. He didn't want Paul Klebnikov to die, and he probably didn't know Paul Klebnikov was going to die, but then he died, and we don't know who the mastermind is. And it's not because Russian police are incompetent. The police investigator on this case is the same police investigator on the Anna Politkovskaya case, and he is a world-class Pyotr Gribyan. He is a world-class, first-rate investigator. And my understanding is that in both cases, he either has a feeling of who the murderer was or knows exactly who the murderer was, but is able to prosecute only the triggermen, which is what he's done. End parentheses. Back into the. Did everyone that's a segue? Okay. Just so you know, I'm not letting Putin off the hook. Putin's game has been to project, having cemented his power in Russia, to project it into Europe. How? Through the construction of natural gas pipelines. Russia controls 30% of Europe's natural gas supply, and he's wanted to build two pipelines, the Nord Stream pipeline and the South Stream pipelines, and cement and build on that 30%, and use this projection of economic power for political influence. And the states that have gone along with this, who are his partners in this, include Germany, France, Italy, especially. But he methodically, like a good capitalist, went from state to state. So he started in Turkmenistan in Central Asia and agreed to pay world-class. He's not stealing this stuff. He's not stealing the natural gas. He bargained. He offered Turkmenistan has the fourth largest natural gas reserves in the world. Offered them world rates for their natural gas, and the idea is to bring that all the way into Europe. And then went to Bulgaria, Hungary, Austria, Serbia, Greece, Turkey, and made deals with the leaders of all these countries, and wheeling and dealing, offering them half of the pipeline, an oil field, who knows what else. greasing the wheels there, and ended up getting all of these countries' agreement on this. What is Putin doing here? What's the strategy that he is carrying out? Has anybody here ever heard of Sheila Heslin? Vladimir Putin, I don't think, has ever heard of Sheila Heslin either, but he is carrying out the Sheila Heslin policy. Sheila Heslin is a neighbor of mine in Bethesda, Maryland, and she has a trampoline in her backyard and has invited my 6-year-old daughter to jump with her 6-year-old son on this trampoline. And but 15 years ago, Sheila Heslin was at the very center and the conceiver of the policy that planted American power in Russia's backyard, in Central Asia and the Caucasus. Sheila Heslin was a low-ranking officer on the National Security Council right after the breakup, and in charge of Central Asia and the Caucasus. And today, I keep saying Central Asia and the Caucasus, so you've got this in your brain now. But I mean, imagine before you walk through the door, except for the specialists, this is not something that rolls off the tongue and you don't hear it and your eyes glaze over. This is 15 years after the U.S. planted the flag there. So you can imagine in 1993 and 1994 when Sheila proposed to the National Security Council that the U.S. challenge Russian power in its own backyard on behalf of Central Asia and the Caucasus, that she got some pretty wild looks, and she did. But Heslin argued a couple things. First, she argued that Russia needed to learn to live within its own borders. How was this traditionally expansionist country going to learn that? And that's where you get NATO expansion. Why did NATO expand? To take away these countries, Eastern Europe and Central Europe, that Russia had naturally expanded into. But how do you do that in Central Asia and the Caucasus? NATO isn't going to expand all the way to the border of Western China. Thomas Friedman is famous for saying, if you brand it, you own it. Sheila Heslin branded the explanation of Russia's power in Central Asia and the Caucasus, how it was continuing to hold on to these 8 republics despite their having technical independence, and what the U.S. needed to do about it. She used this phrase, iron umbilical cord. She called the pipeline system the natural gas and the oil pipelines that went from Central Asia and the Caucasus, from Kazakhstan, Turkmenistan, Azerbaijan to market. All of them went through Russia. None of these countries could export to any other country their natural gas or oil without passing through Russia, hence this umbilical cord. And Heslin argued that we needed to sever, to help these countries to sever that cord, actually to do that by providing them an alternative oil and natural gas route, an independent way of sending their oil and natural gas to market, not touching Russian soil. And this was a revolutionary thought, and she persuaded the foreign policy apparatus in Washington that we should get behind that. But it was another matter getting getting the Central Asians and the Caucasus leaders themselves behind it. In 1998, one morning I was awoken by one of my assistants in Tbilisi. At the time, I was living in Tbilisi, and it was a call that there had been an assassination attempt against Edward Shevardnadze, who was then the president, and in the morning I went to see what had happened, and there was a copse, a small group of trees next to a big highway that Shevardnadze would drive down on his way home every night. And he had a group of half a dozen bulletproof armored Mercedes limousines, and they would drive at very high speed from the presidential palace to his house, and you could see that these men had hidden behind these trees in this copse as the convoy drove past, and they had with them rocket-propelled grenades, and they fired and they hit and disabled every one of the vehicles. Shevardnadze survived because his driver had the presence of mind to keep his foot on the gas, and even though the tires had been blown out, it kept sliding forward another 20 feet, putting him out of the line of sight of that copse, of these gunmen. Sheila Heslin blamed this on Russia. She said that it was intimidation meant to persuade or dissuade Shevardnadze from his strategy of promoting Georgia as the route for this non-Russian oil pipeline. The point man for this local point man for this policy was Heydar Aliev, the president of Azerbaijan. But he needed to be persuaded. He made it clear that he was not going to go along with a purely commercial deal. He needed to know that if he took on Russia, if he challenged Russia there and risked everything, that he was going to have a long relationship with the United States, a diplomatic relationship. And Bill Clinton sent a note with Zbigniew Brzezinski. Brzezinski, at that Carter's former national security advisor. Brzezinski was going there anyway. He worked for Amoco at the time, and he went to one of these dinners with Aliev, a lot of carousing and all of that, and as usual, Aliev kept this hideaway in the basement of his palace, and he called it the cave. And this was down this long stairway, and he had built this place himself, and he took Brzezinski down there, and he had decorated it with fake stalactites and stalagmites, and he had leopard skins hanging over the bar stools, and he had bear heads on the walls, and a lot of alcohol, and he and Brzezinski drank all night, and finally Brzezinski was able to pull Aliev aside and hand him this letter from Clinton, and the letter stated, if you decide to build to get behind these non-Russian pipelines, it was actually 3 pipelines, you will have the political relationship that you seek with the United States. And Aliev replied on the spot to Brzezinski, if this is the case, let's build the pipelines. And the idea was 2 short pipelines, one to mollify Russia into Russia, one through Georgia, just to the Georgian coast, and then the big pipeline, the Baku-Ceyhan pipeline through Georgia and then Turkey to the Mediterranean coast. And that weekend, that was a Friday, and that weekend it was supposed to be signed on Monday. Everything looked peachy, and Sheila Heslin's sister was getting married on that Sunday, and she was the maid of honor. And so she went to this wedding, and she stood on the altar and witnessed her sister being married. And when the wedding was over, she stepped down from the altar, and there waiting for her was the usher with 4 pieces of pink note paper on which was written, "Call the White House, call the White House, call the White House." And the 4th said, "Call the White House." And so she called the White House. And what had happened was that this was a message from the Georgian ambassador to Washington. He had received a panicked phone call from Aliev, the Azerbaijan president's secretary, who said he was hiding under a desk outside of Aliev's office, and inside Aliev's office, 3 Russian generals were hovering over Aliev and pointing at him and shouting, "There will be one pipeline, only one pipeline through Russia." And Heslin, who I think at the time is about 35 years old, and a junior member on the Security Council. Everything had already been done. Brzezinski had already delivered the letter. There was not much to do, and that's what she said. We got to wait it out, and it was signed. The deal was signed the next day, and these pipelines were built, and the outcome was that the states, and especially Georgia, tied themselves diplomatically, yes, but through infrastructure, a pipeline, tied themselves to the West through NATO partner Turkey, and then just circling around to now. Again, we come back to the August events in Georgia that seemed to put the lie to that long arc of events. And I want to wind up with this. Why have I changed my mind about that which seemed to have such finality just in September, just a month ago, and that's that there's a phrase, game changer, and the events in Russia. This is one game changer. It's a potential game changer if the next president is visionary enough, or appoints someone on Russian affairs, on Central Asia, Caucasus affairs, who is visionary enough or strategic thinking enough. There's an opening there. There's an opening to negotiate and find common ground with Russia. But there's something more. There's something more than that. The next president is going to be obsessed and distracted by the U.S. economy. The next president is going to be focused and obsessed with Iraq and Afghanistan. But Europe and the threat to U.S. influence in Russia that is a product of this natural gas policy is something that I think is right after Iraq and Afghanistan as in the top 3 top three issues of strategic importance. The other big game changer that is part of this fabric is Iran. A lot of people are talking about this, and I am too, and that's that the biggest game changer of all involving Russia, involving the natural gas issue, and this whole pipeline game would be a deal with Iran. Would be if the next president could manage what Kissinger and Nixon did with China in 1972, a deal with Iran, normalization of relations with Iran would change the game in the Middle East, of course, but it would also change the game in Europe, because the aim of diversifying Europe's natural gas in order to reduce Russian influence in Europe and therefore secure American political influence in Europe would be a product of delivering Iranian natural gas to Europe, and there's critical mass around this. A month ago, or so, 5 former secretaries of state, those immediately prior to the George W. Bush administration, met at George Washington University in Washington, and they agreed as a group, all 5 of them, starting with Kissinger, that we ought to meet without preconditions with Iranian leaders, and so to summarize, the thought that I want to leave with you is that the events that we're watching before our eyes, it's not just turmoil. There's a possible rhyme to come out of this situation. There's something solid that can come out of it if the next president has the vision to see it and do something about it. Thanks very much.
However much Putin increased Russian prosperity, I wonder whether, and this is just a speculation, whether Putin could have increased prosperity much more by playing it straight in instituting a market economy. That is, he did very important reforms on the rule of law and taxation, but then if instead of handing over the economy to, well, his oligarchs, he actually had been a guardian of a real market economy, would that have increased prosperity of Russia within Russia? And then I guess the follow-up to that would be, did he choose not to do that exactly in order to have his hand on levers of power to play the expansion game? So was there a trade-off between economic prosperity and, well, world power?
Yeah. I think he did want to keep, and does want to keep, his hands on the levers. I think in the beginning he saw this as a necessity against the chaos of 1999 and 2000, and also saw it as a necessity, economic chaos, and then also saw it as a necessity to consolidate his political power. He vocally and openly and explicitly reinstituted what he called the vertical power from the Kremlin all the way down to the lowest common denominator in the provinces, and which is the traditional Russian form of power. This is speculation. We're speculating. Russia's never, I don't want to use the word never, is not soon going to have a democracy. It's not going to have an American-style market economy. The economy that Putin formed suits Russia, and incidentally, it's similar to Asian economies like Singapore, like South Korea, where the state does keep a strong hold on industries, what they regard as strategic industries. His model is not Europe. It's not the United States. Now, you might argue, which apparently you are arguing, that he could have done better were he have to look west instead of east. Maybe. Yeah.
Because of the great power and respect that he had, he could have done that. And just, for the sake of argument, you could say that if he had looked west, then NATO expansion not only wouldn't have been an aggravation, it would even take certain temptations away. And by doing that, and even throw Georgia into NATO, that by having that avenue, by having that model foreclosed, Russia, and this is a question, could Russia, following the Western model, actually have been more prosperous now?
I don't know. You would probably also argue that if he wasn't corrupt, that it would be better. Are you going to argue that? Okay. I don't know. I guess the way that I go is that the things that have happened, NATO expansion and Russia's adverse reaction to that and to Kosovo, that was going to happen anyway. I think the United States and certain European countries wanted to expand NATO all the way to Georgia and Ukraine, and those countries wanted to be part of NATO. And I think Kosovo would have happened regardless. And I also think, believe me, I realize how this sounds, but I'm just being candid, that the antagonistic relationship would have happened too, because there's just a different way of looking at events. Yeah, Russell.
Well, since you were speaking of antagonism, so at this point, is Russia kind of done with Georgia for the time being in terms of its aggression toward them, or is it just a period where they want to see what Georgia does next?
Now, do you mean to ask, is it done period, or is it done militarily?
Is it done militarily?
Yeah, I think so. I think that it's when you were a boy, you punched the bully in the nose once, you don't have to do it again, right? And everyone else saw you do it, right? So he did that, and he will not. I don't think that. Let's just start from. I don't think he'll do it with another country. He's not going to do it to Kazakhstan or Azerbaijan or whomever. And then, I suppose his guys could cross over again into Georgia proper again. My feeling is he won't, and I also don't think that he'll mess directly with the pipeline. He bombed 45 bombs all around the Baku-Ceyhan pipeline without hitting it, but demonstrated that he could hit it, and that's all he needed to do. So, yeah.
You mentioned that the U.S. could gain by striking deals in the Caucasus. We're having a more cohesive strategy with them. But what could the U.S. gain by doing this other than leverage over Russia? And a follow-up to that, what do you think the goal of U.S. foreign policy in the Caucasus should be?
The U.S. If I implied that isn't what I mean, because the U.S. already has relationships with the countries, all the countries in the Caucasus and Central Asia, and in fact, they're all pro-U.S. And I don't expect them to. They're not happy with Iraq policy, but that doesn't mean they're not pro-U.S. They are. Europe. Eastern Europe. that the places like Bulgaria and Serbia and Austria and Greece that have signed deals with Russia supporting the South Stream and or the North Stream pipeline, but primarily the South Stream pipeline, that this is our natural diplomatic terrain, and the United States has strategic gain to be made by bringing those countries over to a U.S.-backed way of thinking on the supply of energy to Europe. That's just one. That's one objective that the U.S. ought to think about. But in general, to your question, what does the U.S. have to gain from this opening? I don't think we know what we want, and I also think that the gains. This is where a creative mind needs to go to work, because the gains, there are concrete gains to be made, but they're not they're abstract. They're not visible. It's not like we want to control Lithuania, and it's Kissingerian, Yes, sir.
I think I'm less optimistic about both the nature of Russia today and its future than you are. And the first point would be that, according to the latest statistics, 40% of Russians now live below the poverty level. And when I lived in the Soviet Union about 40 years ago, it wasn't any worse than that. And then secondly, the Russian literature now is talking about essentially the backwardness of Russia and how Putin's handing out of almost everything to his buddies has done nothing but reinforce that. And that these people are sort of in the situation, if it works, don't change it. And so therefore, a number of things I've read recently says the technological gap between Russia and the West is increasing and will continue to increase because there's no incentive for anyone in Russia to innovate, and they don't. And so that the projection can only be that Russia will become poorer, particularly as their hydrocarbons begin to run out. And, then if they have to bail out oligarchs to the tune of a couple billion apiece and so on and so forth, there's not going to be much left for anybody else.
Do you have a question? I'll comment on those, but do you want to ask something too?
No, that's...
Okay. Okay. This is a point of view. Let me just say a couple of things that the for a long stretch of the Soviet period, there was a certain standard of living, as you know from living there, that was guaranteed by the state. The distinction of today is that the standard of living in qualitative terms and quantitative terms are larger. So more people living better. And what do I mean by living better? You yourself know every single apartment in, not just in Moscow, across the whole former Soviet Union, every single one of the 15 states had exactly the same kitchen, exactly the same living room. And what's that famous movie that's played every Christmas? Yeah. All right. So just being able to buy what you need, to travel, to having extra income. I mean, the difference between when I went to Moscow in 1987 and 1992 when I had an apartment there, and going last year, there's just no comparison. And it's not just, yes, there's Billionaire Row, down there near Tverskaya, but the whole city is well, I guess the cranes have stopped at the moment because of the crunch, but the whole city, it looks better, it's vibrant. And then in terms of this technological gap, when I was researching the first book, the oil book, this is something that since the Nobel, the Nobel's father, Emmanuel Nobel, he's the one who brought Alfred Nobel's brothers into Russia in the early 19th century, and revolutionized shipbuilding and munitions for the Tsar. There's always been this technological gap, but the takeaway that we get, that the West gets, is somehow that this means Russia is going down the tubes. Well, it didn't mean Russia was going down the tubes then, and then in just the oil industry, what is the talk of the oil industry? Talk of the oil industry is horizontal drilling. That instead of drilling 100 derricks, we drill one in one place and drill horizontally. What a great state-of-the-art thing, invented in the Soviet Union in 1923. So I just, I think there is a technological gap, but I also think that it's exaggerated here. There are problems there. I think the biggest problem for Russia is its demographic gap, if you want to call it that. The population's shrinking, and men are living shorter and shorter lives. The last time I looked, it's 59, and probably I haven't looked recently. Maybe it's 58 or 57. Yeah. So this is something. So anyway, this is my reply. I respect your opinion. I think it's valid, but this is my reply. Yes, sir.
I was wondering if you could maybe talk a little bit more about Russia's relations with Western European countries. And specifically, I've heard recently that the ex-chancellor is somehow involved with Gazprom in a very intimate way, the German ex-chancellor.
Yeah.
And then how that affects the relations between Western European countries and the U.S. I mean, the relations between...
Yeah.
Russia.
This is exactly the point. Yeah, Gerhard Schroeder is an employee of Gazprom. He is the chairman of the Nord Stream pipeline. So that pipeline is probably going to happen. But this is exactly the point that Putin has done a magisterial job of bringing around the major the biggest European countries to his point of view, one by one, bilaterally. So Europe doesn't take a European Union-wide position on Georgia or on whatever. Take your pick, because Putin has made highly beneficial agreements with each one of these countries bilaterally. Italy is totally in Putin's pocket. Why? Because ENI, the Italian oil and natural gas company, is a favorite partner of Gazprom's, and so it is always in the Putin camp. And Germany, Merkel, she's had to straddle this. She goes both ways, but big German companies, BASF and E.ON, are both huge, and they're both big with Putin, with Russia. So what's the outcome? The outcome is that countries that the U.S. regards as top rank, first rate, top of the line, essential allies, are of two minds on key issues that the U.S. cares about. Do you want to go? Yeah, go ahead.
I'm sorry.
No, I did.
Okay, I was wondering if you might be able to comment on the defensive missile deal that the United States has been spinning in sort of Central and Eastern Europe recently, and the countries that are involved and how that plays into the struggle for oil.
Yeah, unessential and unnecessary provocation with Russia. Period. You know, there's just these missile systems are not proven, and so I think you have to start from there. If you've got something proven and it works, then you decide, do you want to use it? But if they don't work, you can't even start with the discussion. So I don't think that we should have ever even begun a negotiation with Poland and the Czech Republic on that topic. Sure.
Thank you.
Okay. I remember reading once that Iran's president had asked for the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, which is mostly Central Asian countries, Russia and China, that he wanted them to become a counterweight to NATO, especially in Central Asia. So I was wondering what the U.S. and NATO's response should be to this organization taking root in Central Asia.
I don't think it's. I think the SCO is its role is exaggerated. It keeps being identified as a military group. I don't think it is, and I don't think it's going to be. I don't think China wants it to be. There have been military. What is this word? Yes, that have accompanied. Yeah, but I don't see SCO as a threat, and they rejected Iran's proposal. So I think SCO is designed as an economic union, and that's what it is centrally. Yeah.
Russia sent some type of foreign official to a meeting with likewise officials from Iran and Qatar, I think this week, to talk about formation of a potential gas conglomerate. Couple that, excuse me, with the fact that Russia just recently did this exchange in Kyrgyzstan with, they were basically assured a new military base, and in return, bought a bunch of gas from Kyrgyzstan. Can you, I guess what I mean by this is that I'm sort of in the camp that you said you were just in terms of the U.S. having lost out on all of these potentials in Central Asia and all of that. Can you explain how, maybe given some of these new changes, why you still feel that there's this potential in Central Asia for Western growth? Or
Yeah. I think I want to be clear that I'm not saying that the U.S. is has regained its foothold. It has another chance. Yeah. Sorry, go ahead. Do you want to?
Yeah, I was just wondering if there were any things that you could point to as opportunities for U.S. growth or expansion, or even just a relationship in general that would be an improvement upon the current situation.
Yeah, well, I think that Central Asia. Let's go through the thing. Russia established its base in Kyrgyzstan as an answer to the U.S. base Manas, and I mean that's natural. That's going to happen, and Kyrgyzstan is going to do it because who's the biggest power in the neighborhood, right? And so I'm not surprised by that, and I don't regard that as a threat to the Manas base. The natural gas OPEC that was agreed. They agreed that yesterday Qatar, Venezuela, and Iran and Russia. I found that interesting. Let's see what happens. Let's see if it's more difficult operating with natural gas than oil. But if they really do it, I mean, that's an interesting development. Central Asia is the longest shot in terms of American potential regaining of influence in the region. Why? Because it's not attached to Europe. It is isolated. It's separated by the Caspian Sea. The U.S. has maintained its relationships there. The loss there is in perceptions. So Kazakhstan and Turkmenistan especially understand what happened in Georgia, and they understand what the West won't do for them if they stick their necks out in any way with Russia. The opening for the West is primarily on the there are places of common ground. There are places of mutual interest anyway, even before these events. For example, arms control. Putin and Medvedev would instantly sign a revitalized anti-ballistic missile deal with the United States, and that would be a good starting point to begin with. A reduction of nuclear weapons, a mutual reduction. Neither country needs so many weapons, and this would build goodwill. But the main ground on which to gain strategic influence, leverage, is on the grounds of energy, and it is working the ground to make a more diversified natural gas supply for Europe, which would reduce the growth of Russian influence in Europe and increase the political breathing room for the Caucasus republics, Georgia, Azerbaijan, and Armenia. Okay? No one from this side? Come on, you guys.
Do you think that the Russian, when they declared that South Ossetia was independent, that they might have these attitude might backfire in a sense that it might stir up independent movements within Europe, within Russia, like Chechen again, and everything that will come back. Like if you're stimulating the other countries and other regions to separate from the countries, why can't we do that? I mean, don't you think that it can backfire instead of helping the Russians?
Okay, so the question is, do I think it would backfire, or did Russia think about that? Well, they should have thought about it. It could. It definitely could. I mean, I thought this wouldn't happen. I predicted this wouldn't happen because Russia was using South Ossetia. What was its lever with Georgia? Whenever it couldn't get what it wanted with Georgia, with Saakashvili, it would stir up trouble either in Abkhazia or Ossetia. Once you go all the way to recognition of independence, you don't have it. What does Georgia have to lose now? So that's why I thought this would not happen. I don't think that it was a retributive. Is that how to pronounce that? Action by it's showing. It was Russia showing, hey, we can do it too. You did Kosovo, well, look what we can do. And it's showing what I said earlier. You think this is your strip of land? You built your pipelines, you think this? No. And let's show you how fast it isn't yours. What are you going to do about it? This is what that was. Now, is that smart? Is it long-term smart? It's Putin with a short fuse. the Russians are assertive, but they're not insane. And so I just don't see that. I don't see that. Even I also didn't think they would go into Ossetia, but I just I mean, you asked, that's my answer. I just don't see that. But I think that it's totally unnecessary that we have so many objects on the playing field that are more important than that. There's no reason to do that unless you're doing that as a chip to then get something and then take it back off the table. But it doesn't look, does Bush deal with chips? I mean, he I don't think he's that bright, I think he just, did this. It's just, let's see what the next president does. Yes, sir.
Could you say something more about how Stalin is regarded in various places and what difference that makes?
What difference it makes in what regard?
And what's going to happen for it?
Well, Stalin's highly regarded. They just had this contest, popularity contest, and he did very well. I don't know what to say about that. There's not the same understanding that the West has of Stalin there, and what does it mean? I think it's a serious problem. It's a serious problem because you got to know your history. Putin's making the error of building up nationalism and the youth groups. Nashi, this group Nashi, I met with them, and this is a troubling group. A troubling group. All I can say is I'm troubled by it, but I think that it's hard to say anything definitive about it. Sorry, I should. You. Yeah.
My question plays back to the military conflict. Do you think that...
which conflict?
Military conflict.
Yeah.
Do you think that when Georgia invaded Southern Ossetia and Abkhazia, it might have been guided by any way by U.S.?
No.
No? Like even...
Even what?
Might have gotten any signals that it misinterpreted them in any way? Or do you think it was solely their own decision to do that?
It was their own decision. Yeah. I mean, Saakashvili may have seen something, he thought he saw something, but I don't think there was something there. I don't think he got a signal. I think that there was the soup. There was a dangerous soup. And look, all of Russia's neighbors have their problems with Russia. None of them has gone to war with Russia over it. Why? Look, yeah, only Saakashvili, would do that. Why was he even near South Ossetia? There's no explanation. There's no excuse for that. It was ignorant, and and then once you do that, you can say yes, but then the Russians, shouldn't have come all the way. Once you do something like that, once you take that kind of a move, you cannot then start judging the reaction of your opponent. It's you broke the rule, so there's no control of war, and so I think that Saakashvili knew what he was getting into. He didn't think that he probably didn't think. I guess he didn't think that the Russians. He probably thought the Russians would stop if they came in. They would stop at the South Ossetian border, not come into Georgia, not take the whole northern part of the country and bomb Pati, not capture Abkhazia. I don't know why he wouldn't think that. Did he forget 1993? I mean, it's very similar to what happened then. Yeah. Any more from this side? Okay.
Yes, I was wondering if you could comment on Ukraine, specifically in the Crimea with Russia's base in Sevastopol, and with the military, the Navy specifically being stationed there, and with the ultimatum regarding NATO that resulted when these ships were deployed for the conflict with Georgia.
And and a direct question is?
Well, I mean, how essentially, how can you think that the current state of combat has ended, as you've said, Russia having sort of made some sort of gesture, punched the bully or something like that. Clearly there was a very complex situation here regarding Ukraine's own domestic politics, with its relations between the United States, Western Europe, and Russia, the various ethnic groups involved in that very particular area, Russia itself, Russia wanting hegemony over Ukraine still, at the same time wanting hegemony, in some extent wanting hegemony over Georgia. So how could it be possible that this would not lead to the same kind of thing that we've seen once again, which is, again, confused ethnic boundaries, confused intentions, confused politics, and lots of money, lots of military. It doesn't seem that this is a stable situation at all. I don't really see how you could say that it's stable in Eastern Europe yet.
Well, one, I didn't say it was stable. But the question was, do I think Russia is going to use its military again? My answer to that is no. Does that mean that Russia is going to stop using every one of its other levers to get what it wants? The answer to that is also no. Russia has its aims, including putting what it regards as a pro-Russian leader or a more pro-Russian leader in charge of Ukraine, and it has backed Tymoshenko. And it'll do, Putin also tried to influence until the last moment, the last election, the last Ukrainian election. Sevastopol, this is an entirely different topic. I mean, it's the Russians don't accept that Khrushchev gave that over, but the question is, do they go to war? I guess I just cannot imagine. I don't see it. If you say you see it, okay. Then I regard that as a valid opinion, and we don't know. We're both conjecturing. I mean, I'm looking at it at Russia's past, post-Soviet past. What has it done militarily? What has it been willing to do militarily? What actions, what punitive actions has Russia been willing to take locally, and what in Caucasus and Central Asia, and not elsewhere? And I see a dividing line. I don't see Russia taking the same actions in Ukraine, for example, that it has in Georgia, that it has in Azerbaijan, in Tajikistan, in Transdniester. So it could, sure, things could blow up, and don't forget the other ethnic areas. Khalkhalaki, the Armenian area of southern Georgia, could also blow up. That's predicted. The Lezgin area of southern Azerbaijan. That's also people say Nagorno-Karabakh could blow up again. I guess I'm not a doomsday guy. Yeah.
Could you be more specific when you say that you don't see this happening based on the history of the past 18 years, 15 years. But it's very interesting how you say that this does not apply to this.
Okay. this is a good question. Why do I see it that way? Look at 1993. Russia was willing to back Abkhazia and the Mongolians in taking over Abkhazia and marching basically all the way to the doors of Tbilisi. And in the subsequent years, on repeated occasions, basically keeping Georgia in the dark, literally cold and dark, until Saakashvili, came to power and brought in more money, and they're able to face. That was 12 years of that, and so I don't see an equivalent of that in Ukraine. Meddling in another country's elections is not creating such instability that you almost a military instability, bringing military forces halfway across the country, cutting it almost in half, and almost bringing down the state. Thank you.
The World Beyond the Headlines lecture series is a collaborative project of the University of Chicago Center for International Studies and the International House Global Voices program. The World Beyond the Headlines series aims to bring scholars and journalists together to consider international news stories and how these stories are covered. As a listener, you have come to rely on this program for in-depth analysis of major issues facing our country and our world. But we can only continue our nationally recognized coverage with support from you. Secure the future of World Beyond the Headlines programming by making your gift online at alumniservices.uchicago.edu/giving. Please specify World Beyond the Headlines as the area of giving. The World Beyond the Headlines series is supported by the McCormick Foundation, the Norman Wade Harris Fund, and from generous contributions from listeners like you.